At 1:45 on the morning of the 30th of September 1888, Police Constable Edward Watkins found the body of Catherine Eddowes in the southwest corner of Mitre Square on the eastern fringe of the City of London. He raised the alarm, and within moments police were converging on Mitre Square. As they began a fairly detailed crime scene investigation, it became apparent to the detectives at the scene that the killer had cut off and gone away with a large portion of Catherine Eddowes' apron. That piece of apron was discovered at 2:55 in the morning in this street here, Goulston Street, round about 5 minutes' walk from Mitre Square. This photograph shows Goulston Street as it would have appeared at the time. And if you look in the background on the right, you can see a large apartment block. That building is Wentworth Model Dwellings, which had been built between 1886 and 1887 on land that had formerly been occupied by some of the district's most sordid slums, which had been swept away at the end of the 1870s. In 1888, this building was largely occupied by Jewish residents. This is Wentworth Model Dwellings as it looks today. At 2:55 a.m. on the morning of Sunday the 30th of September 1888, just over an hour after Watkins had found the body of Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square, Police Constable Alfred Long was walking his beat along Goulston Street and was passing Wentworth Model Dwellings when, in the doorway that led to the staircase of numbers 108 to 119, he found the missing piece of apron. It was stained with blood and feces, and the blade of a bloody knife had evidently been wiped on it. Long didn't know it at the time, but he had found the only physical clue that Jack the Ripper ever left behind. It's a clue for several reasons. Firstly, it's a geographical clue because it tells us which direction the killer headed in after having committed the murder of Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square. He would undoubtedly have been aware that the area would soon be awash with police officers hunting for the perpetrator of the crime. So therefore it was imperative that he went to ground as quickly as possible and headed home. And the fact he came from Mitre Square to Goulston Street means that he headed east. In other words, it suggests that whoever it was, he was somebody who lived in the area. Secondly, it answers the question of how much blood the killer had on himself after the crimes. There is a commonly held belief that the killer would have been covered in blood as he fled the scenes of his crimes. But this is not necessarily the case. The evidence suggests that he asphyxiated his victims first, so the hearts would have stopped beating and there would not have been the arterial spurt that would have covered him in blood when he came to carry out the horrific mutilations. Certainly his hands would have been blood-stained, which is why he took the portion of apron, as he would have been anxious to wipe away the incriminating blood as soon as possible. Had he stopped in the open streets to do so, he might have been noticed and attracted suspicion. He needed privacy, and as it happened, this was a recessed doorway in which the lights on the stairs were extinguished at 11 o'clock at night. It therefore offered perfect cover for him to wipe his hands, wipe his knife, and then, clear of incriminating bloodstains, he stepped out onto the street and headed back to his lair, wherever it may have been in the district. Constable Long's first thought on finding the apron was that somebody had been attacked and might be lying injured or even dead on the stairwell within, so he stood up intending to search inside the doorway. As he did so, he saw a message scrawled in chalk on the wall which read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The word Jews was spelt J-U-W-E-S or J-E-W-E-S or J-U-E-W-S. Different police officers would later remember different spellings of the graffito. The meaning, though, was quite obvious. It was anti-Semitic graffito above a genuine clue that had been left behind by the murderer. Moments later, another officer arrived at the scene, and Long asked him to guard the building, telling him to keep a careful watch on anybody entering or leaving it. Long then took the apron round to Commercial Street Police Station and handed it over to an inspector. Soon, officers of the Metropolitan Police's H Division were gathering around the doorway and were gazing at the graffito with feelings of great trepidation. Mindful of the strong feelings of anti-Semitism that had surfaced in the area in the wake of the leather apron scare, and realising that Wentworth model dwellings not only stood in a largely Jewish locality, but was also inhabited almost exclusively by Jews, the Metropolitan Police began to fear that if the message was left, it could lead to a resurgence of the unrest that had swept the district in early September, and the consequences could be dire. They were therefore anxious to erase the message, and to do so sooner rather than later. But both the apron and the graffito pertained to an investigation that was being carried out by a separate police force, the City of London Police, in whose jurisdiction Catherine Eddowes had been murdered. The city detectives had soon crossed the boundary into Metropolitan Police territory and were also gathering around the doorway. They were not so keen to erase what they saw as an important clue in their investigation, and the two forces clashed over what should be done about the chalked message. The city police were adamant that it should be photographed. The Metropolitan Police pointed out that that would mean waiting until it was light, by which time Gentile buyers would be arriving in their thousands to purchase from the Jewish stallholders at the Petticoat Lane, Wentworth Street and Goulston Street Sunday markets. Since there was no way of keeping the message hidden from these crowds, the Metropolitan Police believed that the result might well be a full-scale riot against the Jews. Inspector Daniel House of the City of London Police suggested a compromise whereby only the top line, "the Jews are," would be erased. But as Superintendent Arnold of the Metropolitan Police later pointed out in a report, had only a portion of the writing been removed, the context would have remained. The bickering was still going on when Sir Charles Warren arrived at the scene between 5 and 5:30 a.m. Since the doorway stood on Metropolitan Police territory, and he was the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, his word was final, and he immediately concurred with his officers that leaving the graffito any longer would lead to far greater crimes against innocent Jews. So he ordered that the message be erased without delay and before any photograph of it could be taken. It would prove one of the most controversial orders he gave in the entire investigation, and he was subjected to intense press criticism in the days that followed, and indeed his actions in having the graffito erased before it could be photographed have been the subject of numerous conspiracy theories in connection to the Jack the Ripper mystery ever since. On the 6th of November, in a report to the Home Office, Warren defended his action. It was just getting light. The public would be in the streets in a few minutes in a neighbourhood very much crowded by Jewish vendors and Christian purchasers from all over London. I do not hesitate to say that if the writing had been left, there would have been an onslaught upon the Jews, property would have been wrecked, and lives would probably have been lost. In fairness to Sir Charles Warren, many of those who saw the graffito commented that it looked faded, as though it had been there for some time. Also, it seems somewhat unlikely that, having taken the trouble to clean his hands to obliterate incriminating bloodstains, the Ripper would have then risked lingering in the doorway long enough to chalk the message on the wall, knowing that at any moment a passing police officer might spot him. The probability is that the message was already there, possibly left over from the anti-Semitic unrest that had swept the area in the wake of the leather apron scare, and that it was a complete coincidence that the Ripper had chosen that same doorway in which to clean himself up and leave behind his only clue. Given the events of a few weeks previous, Warren was probably justified in his belief that erasing the message would spare innocent Jews from becoming the targets of avenging Gentile mobs, and he probably made the right judgment call based on the information immediately available to him. With hindsight, however, it is interesting to note that, because of the controversy over Warren's actions, the Goulston Street graffito was widely reported, and yet the wide-scale anti-Semitism that Warren so feared did not break out again. Today, the Happy Days fish and chip shop occupies the doorway in which the graffito was found, and in their restaurant you will find a display of various exhibits and images connected with the Jack the Ripper case, including a reproduction of the writing that was found on their wall. People come here to enjoy their mouth-watering portions of fish and chips, and few of them give any thought to the fact that they are dining at the very location at which Jack the Ripper left behind his only clue.